In his legacy as a prophetic radical and political pragmatist, and the almost unimaginable bravery of his early journey and the resilience of his later career, in his achievements as a writer, activist, crusader, intellectual, father, and man, the claim that he was the greatest figure that America has ever produced seems hard to challenge. Writer Adam Gopnik is not alone in considering Frederick Douglass, an enslaved person born in Eastern Maryland in 1818, someone who taught himself to read and write and endured impossible hardship before escaping to freedom and becoming perhaps America's most eloquent and inspiring abolitionist, a towering, heroic presence. Douglass's life and work indeed transcend history. His story inspires and instructs, more to be boast of. Today, two seniors will use a portion of this singular man's story, learned in the junior year while reading his autobiography, The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, published in 1845, to emphasize the importance of education. Given the common text and Douglass's outsized life, there are similarities between today's speeches, but listen to for differences, the personal angles taken, the specific kinds of education you might pursue, the various calls to individual action. I should note, too, that you will hear, quoted once from Frederick Douglass's autobiography, the N-word, a word charged with history and injury. While the English classroom policy would leave the word silent on Frederick Douglass's page, never to be written or spoken ourselves, context matters, always, with language perhaps most of all. And it's with the intellectual and personal context of today's speeches in mind that makes room for its inclusion among content that I think you'll agree is well worth listening to, all of it. As always, thanks for your thoughtful attention. Please welcome to the stage first Isaac Brewa and then Aiden Theodore.
Once you learn to read, you will be forever free. For Frederick Douglass, these words carried meaning that was both deeply personal and universal. Written in his autobiography, A Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, they spoke not only to his own journey from slavery to freedom, but also to a broader truth, that education is the path to freedom. This idea is one I've come to appreciate not just through Douglass's story, but through my father's as well. His experience immigrating here from Ethiopia has taught me that education is not merely the gaining of knowledge. It's the foundation of self-discovery and growth. His life exemplifies the truths Douglass articulates in his narrative, that through learning, we can come to understand ourselves, our potential, and the world around us. This morning, I hope to share how Douglass's wisdom and my father's story have shaped my own understanding of the transformative power of education. Douglass's path to literacy began with a twist of fate. At age 8, he was sent to Baltimore to work in the house of the wealthy Hugh and Sophia Alders, a move that spared him the harsher plantation life, but still bound him to the cruelty of slavery. In this house, he encountered something unexpected: proximity to books, conversation, and unexpected teachers. One night, he overheard Mr. Alders scolding his wife, who had begun teaching Douglass the alphabet. Quote, "If you teach that boy how to read, there would be no keeping him. It would forever unfit him to be a slave." Mr. Alders believed that literacy needed to be rationed, hoarded by those lucky enough to be born white. In that moment, Douglass first encountered a truth that would forever change the course of his life: that knowledge is power. We've all heard this expression, knowledge is power, but for Douglass, it wasn't just an abstract concept. It was a life-altering truth. He realized that education was not just a tool for personal growth, but a weapon against oppression. This realization sparked within Douglass a relentless desire to learn. Despite every effort to keep him in ignorance, Douglass found ways to teach himself to read and write. He recounts bribing local boys with bread for lessons, playing on their pride, claiming he could already write as well as they could. Their next words would be, quote, "I don't believe you. Let me see you try." And Douglass would write what he could while the boys watched him. He listened closely as the boys triumphantly pointed out his every mistake, unknowingly honing his abilities. After years of ingenuity and struggle, Douglass finally succeeded in learning how to write. But what drove Douglass was more than curiosity. It was this understanding that education could give him the tools to challenge his condition and imagine a life beyond it. This awareness thrived as he read The Columbian Orator, a collection of essays, poems, and dialogues by Caleb Bingham. He devoured arguments supporting human rights, unlocking the words to question and resist his condition. He describes the moment vividly, quote, "Freedom now appeared, to disappear no more forever. I saw nothing without seeing, I heard nothing without hearing, and I felt nothing without feeling it." Literacy gave Douglass more than the ability to simply read or write. It gave him clarity, self-awareness, and the vision to fight for his liberation. From that moment, he asserts, "I understood the pathway from slavery to freedom." My father's journey began in very different circumstances than Frederick Douglass, but echoes his central truth, that education can open the door for transformation. As a child, my dad lived in the mountains just outside of the Ethiopian capital. By the time he turned 10, the country was becoming a cesspool of corruption and violence. His family's land was taken by the government, and it was no longer a safe place to raise a family. My father was 14 when he was forced to leave it all behind. His home, his parents, traded for a small suitcase and a one-way ticket to America. He never traveled anywhere alone, much less to a different country. And he often recalls the story of his parents watching in utter fear as their son nearly forgot his only suitcase at the security checkpoint in the Ethiopian airport. My father arrived in Chicago with little grasp of English, no family nearby, and few resources. There, he was fortunate to be taken in by the Stewarts, a family of academics who loved him unconditionally and raised him as their own alongside their two other sons. To this day, my brothers and I are bound to this family by something stronger than blood, forever grateful for the kindness they showed our father. Still, the challenges my dad faced in America were immense. He was an African kid with English as a second language, placed right in the middle of a highly segregated 1980s Chicago. Imagine being younger than most of the freshmen sitting to my right, in a completely new country, almost 8,000 miles from the rest of your family. Going from being surrounded by people who look just like you to being a cultural and racial minority. Such was the case with my father. Yet, he embraced learning as his path forward. He excelled in school, mastering the English language within a year of arriving. He took advantage of everything this country had to offer, earning scholarships to both college and graduate school. He lived for himself the way in which education can provide not just skills, but a foundation for prosperity. Learning, however, is only one part of education. Teachers, as we know, hold tremendous power. They shape the futures of their students, acting as guides to new ideas, skills, and perspectives. This role of the teacher is made even more profound when we consider the legacy of Frederick Douglass, whose own journey with education embodies how the act of teaching extends far beyond the individual. For Douglass, education was not a tool of self-liberation, it was a weapon of collective empowerment. Douglass's commitment to teaching was rooted in his belief that education was the key to overcoming the shackles of slavery. He ran secret Sabbath schools, working such that other slaves could achieve literacy and he found, quote, delight in circumventing the tyrants and in blessing the victims of their curses. Through teaching, Douglass enabled other enslaved people to see beyond their immediate circumstances, to question the oppressive systems that bound them. and to imagine a life outside of slavery. His personal pursuit of education became a collective mission, exemplifying how the act of teaching can create a ripple effect of change. Similarly, as much as my father values learning, he also possesses a profound respect for the act of teaching. In fact, one of his first ever jobs was with the inaugural chapter of Teach for America, an organization dedicated to developing teachers and expanding educational opportunities for children nationwide. He was assigned to the Baltimore public school system, where he worked in conditions very different from those here at RL. The majority of his students came from underserved communities and harsh living situations, and the classroom was often hard to manage. However, as my father insists, and as I'm sure many in this hall can attest, teaching isn't easy. And a chaotic classroom was nowhere reason enough to stop my father from striving to provide others with the same education that once opened his eyes to this country's opportunities. Even now, he works as a chemistry teacher at Newton South, cherishing every single day he gets to teach. Now, I know it's easy to feel skeptical when a teacher who seems to dock you for every little mistake claims it's not about the grades. But the reality is that despite their methods, they're right. Education, as Douglas shows us, isn't about fitting into a mold or meeting someone else's expectations. It's about understanding and challenging the world around us, while also learning who we are and what we are called to do. So, the next time any of you are sitting alone at your desk, dreading the prospect of completing an assignment that seems meaningless, I urge you to take a step back and refocus on what the education you receive here is really about. I remind you to seek knowledge, not just to better your circumstances, but to better yourself. Use education as a tool to discover who you are and who you want to be. And when you find your motivation, your voice, share it. Teach others and lift them up with you. As Douglas shows us, and as I've learned from my father's story, the journey of education is not an easy one. But it's a journey worth taking, a journey that leads to a freedom that no one can take away. Thank you.
How do I get tan like yours? How do I get my hair like yours? How do black people get to say the N-word and I can't? What do you mean you don't listen to rap? Can I say it? Can I say it? And so on and so on. Model I drilled into my head at a certain point in my art career to keep some sense of sanity is that people say things out of ignorance and hope, not out of getting paid. Though this is a thoroughly academic school where many would think ignorance could never thrive, I've witnessed many who choose to be ignorant. And at times hateful, saying things meant to be humorous, but revealing a deep-rooted lack of understanding. Let me just say it straight up. All the talk I mentioned earlier is immature. Further than that, stupid. And this behavior can be summed up to one word: ignorance. The wisdom I want to give in this speech is more like a final plea before my fellow seniors and I leave the privileged walls of this school and go into a world outside where our ignorance will be answered with consequences, maybe even physical ones. In short, the purpose of this speech is to stop a lot of y'all from getting a real rude awakening in the real world by asking that you choose to be educated rather than ignorant. Choosing education over ignorance will not only shape us into more thoughtful and compassionate individuals, but also equip us to positively impact the lives of others. The testimony of this wisdom is Frederick Douglass. Douglass was an influential abolitionist and orator born into slavery who escaped through heroic efforts to become one of America's most important figures. The narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, published in 1845, as its name denotes, depicts the life of Frederick Douglass and was written by Douglass himself. In the book, Douglass recounts his time as a slave and his journey to both mental and physical freedom. Douglass describes slavery as solely compatible with an ignorant slave. In contrast, an educated person, he contends, could not bear the circumstances of slavery. During the time of slavery, ignorance was used as a tool of oppression to prevent change and maintain control. While we are far from the conditions of slavery, ignorance continues to serve as a form of power and harm, perpetuating inequality, reinforcing stereotypes, and stunting societal development. The ignorance back then, which kept the oppressed, has not disappeared, but has only manifested itself differently, including in our speech and the way we treat each other. So, a slave can't be ignorant, and Douglass was once a slave. By the end of the book, he somehow ended up being a free man who made me wonder, how did Douglass stop being ignorant? Born into slavery on the White House plantation in Maryland, Douglass was sent at the age of 8 to serve in the home of Hugh and Sophia Auld. Soon after Douglass was moved to the Auld's home, his mistress started teaching him his ABCs, then teaching him how to spell. Now, Douglass's master did not let that slide. He found out and forbade his mistress from teaching him to read, saying that if she, quote, taught that nigger how to read, there would be no keeping him. It would forever unfit him to be a slave. He would at once become unmanageable and of no value to his master. As to himself, it could do him no good, but a great deal of harm. It would make him discontented and unhappy. End quote. Douglass heard what his master said, and from that moment, he knew his path to slavery or freedom. He needed to learn how to read. From what Douglass heard his master say, he knew there was some key in reading and learning that would allow him to escape his bonds. Now, you won't believe me when I tell you this, you may not, but we are far from the times of Frederick Douglass. In addition to books, we have far more access to resources at our fingertips. Articles, essays, and even visual and audio media like documentaries, interviews, and podcasts, posts, and more. As Douglass read books to free himself from ignorance, we must use our resources to do the same. By using what we have at our disposal to better ourselves, we can build bridges where ignorance once created divides. For instance, while it only takes a few clicks to access the history of the M-word and other hateful slurs, it takes serious, thoughtful research to truly understand them. Listening to how these words affect people directly will help us understand the gravity of certain groups using these words, and the significance of reclaiming them like Bruce once opposed, using them as words of endearment. While I can sit up here and explain the history of these words and how they make me feel personally, that would defeat the purpose of my speech. As Douglass fought and studied to better his understanding, we have to take the time to seek out reliable sources of information to better our own. Each of us has an obligation to seek out knowledge actively, challenge our assumptions, and develop from uncomfortable truths. In the age of quick information, there is no excuse for ignorance. It's a choice. Now that we know what it took Douglass to escape his ignorance and how we can apply this strategy to our lives, what do we do now? Well, after Douglass started reading and learning, he didn't just sit complacent with his newfound knowledge. Despite it being illegal and imminent risk of death, he spread it to the people around him. Douglass did this at his Sabbath school, which he held every Sunday at the home of a free colored man. There, Douglass began teaching his fellow slaves how to read. Though the consequences were brutal, these slaves came because they, quote, wished to learn. Their minds had been starved by their cruel masters. They had been shut up in mental darkness. End quote. And Douglass acted as he did, not to hide his reputation, but because it was, quote, the delight of his soul to be doing something that looked like bettering the condition of his race. End quote. For the betterment of the people around us and the human race as a whole, we mustn't stay complacent with the knowledge we learn. We must spread it. I'm not saying we need to be exactly like Douglass and start our own schools from the ground up to teach the ones around us not to be ignorant. I mean, if that's what you want to do, that's your prerogative, and I'm not going to stop you. However, what I'm saying we must do can be a lot smaller than that. For example, there isn't a quicker way of finding out that something you said is completely out of pocket or weird and getting met with a blank stare, or even further than that, a stare of genuine disgust. discussed. The same goes for other situations. Offensive memes dropped in the group chat, racist hot takes shared online, or even moments in the group settings where the conversation veers towards something harmful and hateful. Whether it's a close friend, classmate, or anyone in your day-to-day rotation, silence helps no one. The whole idea of doing this is to make spaces uncomfortable for someone to say ignorant jokes or statements. After enough ignorant jokes and statements are met with the same unimpressed reaction, the person will quickly learn that they are neither Kevin Hart nor Dave Chappelle and should leave the comedy to the comedians. Think harder about what they say and how they say it. Eventually, if they're capable of any level of self-reflection, people will realize that ignorance is neither impressive nor funny and will learn the gravity of what they say. Simply not validating a person's ignorance could be the push they need to self-reflect, think deeper, and learn more. In a world where we don't correct someone when they say ignorant things and let ignorance just slide, we normalize ignorance and subsequently normalize hate. It may be uncomfortable to step up. Most of the time, it's like a flight reflex you can't even control, especially in situations where someone is especially adamant or someone close to you. I've been there. But as Douglas created his Sabbath school for the betterment of his race, find comfort in the fact that choosing to step up in the face of ignorance is for the betterment of that person. As we exit these halls and enter a larger, more diverse world, let this be our call to action. Educate ourselves. Confront ignorance when we see it, and spread the wisdom that education bestows. Because while ignorance may pass in the small world of high school, it will not pass in the world outside of here. So let's stop the childish gimmicks, the low-tier jokes, perpetuating stereotypes, and making excuses. And decide to choose education over ignorance, courage over complacency, and respect over ridicule. Douglas wrote that quote, "Education and slavery were incompatible with each other." So let's ensure we are incompatible with our ongoing bonds of ignorance and create a better world for ourselves and others. Thank you.
Thank you both. There's a lot in there, I think all of us to think about. I hope you younger guys have heard our senior speeches this year, thought about them, chewed on them, and can think about you yourselves up here after someday. I really liked how you did in time the words of Frederick Douglass and the preachings of Frederick Douglass. In my mind, as Joe said, is one of the great American thinkers and people. Helping us, in helping the dead, teach the living, but we've also learned from living today. So thank you both for that. Too much to chew on for me to really parse out here, but you've all heard some phrases and some thoughts about education, ignorance, about the power of story, bringing us home, and the power of self in this process. So thank you both for that. I've said before, when one is honored, we are all honored. I would say in this case, you honored us with your words of presence. So thank you for that. I'd like to ask Class 1 to stand up. Have a great day. Let's offer Class 1 applause as they